Every person who ever rose from ordinary to extraordinary made one decision that changed everything. They stopped thinking like a worker and started thinking like a leader. Because the difference between a worker and a leader isn't in the title, it's in the mindset. You can work hard your whole life and never rise above survival if you never shift how you think. Workers focus on what's in front of them. Leaders focus on what's beyond them. A worker says, what do I have to do today? But a leader asks, what am I building today that will still matter 10 years from now? When you think like a worker, you get stuck in cycles of repetition. You wake up, you go to work, you follow instructions, and you collect a paycheck. But when you start to think like a leader, you begin to create cycles of transformation. You start asking questions like, how can I make this better? How can I multiply what I have? How can I serve at a higher level? Leaders don't wait for permission. They create opportunities. Workers look for instructions. Leaders look for impact. The worker sees a job. A leader sees a mission. See, a leader doesn't just see the problem. They see the possibility within the problem. While a worker says, this can't be done, a leader says, how can we make it happen? A worker is focused on doing what's required, but a leader is focused on becoming what's necessary. That's the mindset shift that changes everything. The moment you stop asking for less responsibility and start taking more ownership, your life begins to change, because leadership begins the moment you take responsibility for what others avoid. It's easy to show up when someone's watching you. It's easy to perform when someone's paying you. But the real measure of leadership is what you do when nobody's watching and nobody's paying yet. A worker waits for motivation. A leader acts from purpose. Workers chase comfort. Leaders chase calling. A worker looks for rules. A leader looks for principles. When you think like a leader, you don't wait to be told what to do. You decide what must be done, and then you move with conviction. Leaders create. They don't just complete. A worker says, tell me what to do. A leader says, here's what we're going to build. The worker focuses on execution. The leader focuses on expansion. That's why leaders get paid for results, not hours. When you think like a leader, you stop trading your time for money and start multiplying your value for impact. You realize that your worth is not determined by how long you work, but by how deeply you think and how greatly you serve. And here's the truth. Most people don't want to think like a leader because thinking like a leader requires faith. It requires you to see what isn't yet visible and move before it's certain. Workers wait for clarity. Leaders move in courage. The worker says, I'll believe it when I see it. The leader says, I'll see it because I believe it. When you think like that, your future begins to obey your vision. The results you want start moving toward you because you're no longer living from your limits. You're living from your leadership. Leaders also understand that growth is more valuable than comfort. The worker wants to stay safe. The leader wants to become strong. Safety feels good, but it keeps you small. Growth feels uncomfortable, but it expands you. Every time life gives you pressure, you have two choices. Shrink back like a worker or rise up like a leader, because leaders understand that pain is a tuition for progress. The leader doesn't run from discomfort. They use it as fuel for destiny. If you're serious about rising to another level, you have to stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like an entrepreneur of your own potential. You have to stop waiting for someone to tell you what's possible and start commanding what's possible. Don't let your job define your identity. You may work for someone right now, but you're building something far greater within you. You're building the mindset that will make you indispensable, unstoppable, and undeniable. A worker is satisfied with getting paid. A leader is obsessed with creating value. The worker thinks about Friday. The leader thinks about forever. You've got to start thinking in decades, not just days. Ask yourself, what am I doing today that will create freedom for my family tomorrow? What am I building now that will still bless people when I'm gone? That's how leaders think. They don't just live for survival. They live for significance. Thinking like a leader means refusing to live reactive. Don't let life happen to you. Make life respond to you. Workers are driven by instructions. Leaders are driven by intention. The worker says, I hope something good happens. The leader says, I'm going to make something good happen. That's why leadership isn't about position. It's about decision. You can be a leader in your home, your business, your community, your faith, and your future. You can lead from wherever you are when you decide to think higher. So today, decide to think differently. Stop thinking like a worker who's waiting for a paycheck and start thinking like a leader who's creating a purpose. Stop asking, how much am I being paid? And start asking, how much am I being developed? Stop asking, When will someone see my potential and start declaring, I already see it myself? Because when you think like a leader, you no longer wait to be chosen, you choose yourself. You were not created to be ordinary, you were created to lead, to multiply, to influence, to dominate your space with excellence. The mindset of a worker will keep you in maintenance, but the mindset of a leader will move you into mastery. The worker survives, the leader builds, the worker obeys, the leader creates, the worker clocks in, the leader rises up. So from this day forward, don't just show up to work, show up to win. Don't just complete assignments, create outcomes. Don't just earn money, build meaning. Because when you think like a leader, everything in your life begins to elevate. Your faith rises, your focus sharpens, your discipline strengthens, and your impact multiplies. The world doesn't need more workers who wait for instructions. It needs more leaders who move with intention. The day you stop thinking like a worker and start thinking like a leader is the day your life shifts from survival to success, from paycheck to purpose, from existence to excellence. A worker wakes up every day asking, what do I have to do today? But a leader wakes up asking, what do I want to create today? That simple shift changes everything. Because when you think like a worker, your life becomes a list of tasks. You're always busy, but not always productive. You're doing a lot, but you're not moving forward. You're working hard, but you're not building anything that lasts. The worker's mind is consumed by what's urgent. The leader's mind is focused on what's important. Vision is the compass that gives your effort direction. Without vision, even your best effort will lead you in circles. You can be the hardest worker in the room, but if you have no clear vision, you're just running on a treadmill, expending energy but going nowhere. A leader understands that activity without alignment is wasted motion. So they don't just ask what needs to be done, they ask what needs to be built. Leaders think from the top down. They begin with the end in mind, they see the future first, then reverse engineer their steps. They work on purpose, not just on projects. A worker looks at what's in front of them, but a leader looks beyond what's visible. The worker says, I'll do my job. The leader says, I'll fulfill my purpose. The difference is not in effort, it's in vision, because vision gives meaning to motion. Vision turns labor into legacy. When you think like a leader, you stop reacting to the day and start directing it. You stop living by default and start living by design. You move from task-oriented thinking to transformation-oriented thinking. Instead of asking, what's next on my list? You start asking, what will this list create in my life? That's how you move from being busy to being effective. A leader's mind is always scanning the horizon. They don't just see where they are, they see where they're going. They can look at a seed and see a tree. They can look at a small beginning and see a massive impact. Vision gives them endurance when results take time. It gives them faith when the process feels slow. It keeps them moving when workers quit. See, the reason many people stay stuck is because they never took the time to define their vision. You can't lead where you can't see. You can't grow beyond what you imagine. A worker focuses on finishing a shift. A leader focuses on shaping a destiny. That's why vision is the foundation of leadership. It turns your work into worship, your effort into elevation, and your hustle into history. So stop asking, what should I do today? And start asking, what am I building with today? Because every task is a brick, and every day is a chance to build your future. Workers build walls, leaders build empires, workers follow instructions, leaders follow inspiration. When you choose vision over task, you stop just doing work and start doing destiny. When you think like a worker, you look for who's at fault. When you think like a leader, you look for what can be fixed. That's the mindset that separates people who repeat their problems from those who rise above them. A worker says, it's not my fault. A leader says, it's still my responsibility. Because leaders understand something powerful. Ownership is the birthplace of transformation. You can't change what you don't own. Most people never step into leadership because they're too busy explaining why they're not responsible. They defend their excuses instead of developing their excellence. But leaders know that blame keeps you stuck and responsibility sets you free. When you blame, you give your power away, you hand control of your results to someone else. But when you take responsibility, you reclaim your authority. You say, I may not have caused this, but I'm going to control what happens next. That's the language of leadership. Workers wait for someone else to make things right. Leaders rise up and make things right themselves. Workers complain about what's wrong. Leaders create what's right. The moment you decide that your life, your results, your mindset, and your success are your responsibility. That's the moment your power returns to you. Leaders understand that failure is not a reason to hide. It's a reason to grow. When something goes wrong, they don't look around. They look within. They ask, what can I learn from this? What can I do better next time? How can I make sure this never happens again? They use every mistake as material for mastery, because leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being accountable. When you think like a worker, you think in terms of tasks and blame. You say, I did my part. But when you think like a leader, you think in terms of outcomes and ownership. You say the result wasn't right, let's fix it. That's a completely different level of thinking. The worker wants to prove they're not wrong. A leader wants to make things right. Taking responsibility doesn't mean taking the blame for everything. It means taking control of your response to anything. Responsibility is responsibility. Your ability to respond with power, purpose, and perspective. That's what makes leaders unstoppable. They don't get paralyzed by what happened. They get proactive about what's next. Every breakthrough begins with ownership. When you accept that your results are your responsibility, you stop waiting for someone to rescue you. You stop pointing fingers and start producing solutions. And when you do that, you start to attract influence, trust, and respect, because people naturally follow those who take responsibility instead of making excuses. So don't waste your energy blaming circumstances, people, or the past. Take that energy and build something better. Because the moment you take responsibility for your life, you step into the seat of leadership. And from that point on, your success is no longer in someone else's hands, it's in yours. There's a major difference between someone who executes and someone who creates. Execution keeps the world running, but creation moves the world forward. A worker says, tell me what to do. A leader says, let me show you what's possible. When you think like a worker, you focus on completing what someone else started. But when you think like a leader, you focus on starting what no one else has imagined. You stop just doing work and start designing impact. Creation is the highest form of leadership. It's the ability to take what doesn't exist and make it real. Workers look for instructions. Leaders look for inspiration. The worker says, what's the plan? The leader says, here's the vision. When you think like a creator, you stop depending on direction and start depending on imagination. You realize that everything great began in someone's mind before it existed in their hands. Every business, every movement, every breakthrough began with one person who refused to just execute. They decided to create. Leaders see possibilities that others miss. They walk into ordinary situations and pull extraordinary outcomes out of them. A worker sees a job. A leader sees a system. A worker completes the assignment. A leader creates a new approach. That's why leaders are rare, because creation requires courage. It takes courage to say, there's a better way. It takes courage to question the familiar and pursue the unknown, but that courage is what births innovation. When you think like a worker, you're always waiting for the next task. When you think like a leader, you're always designing the next step. You don't need someone to hand you a list. You create the list. You don't wait for permission. You create opportunity, because leadership is about creation, not compliance. You're not just trying to get things done, you're trying to bring something new to life. Creation demands vision and faith. You've got to see it before others do and believe in it before others can. Workers focus on the visible, leaders focus on the invisible. Workers finish what's assigned, leaders start what's inspired. The worker says, I hope this works. The leader says, I'll make it work. That mindset changes your posture, your pace, and your power. You can't build a legacy if you're only executing someone else's blueprint. Eventually, you have to design your own. You can learn by executing, but you lead by creating. Every great leader started by following, but they didn't stay there. They took what they learned, added their perspective, and created something new. That's how growth happens. You move from imitation to innovation. So if you want to elevate your life, stop asking, what should I do next? And start asking, what should I build next? Don't just execute systems, create solutions. Don't just complete tasks, construct ideas. Don't just maintain order, manufacture opportunity, because the moment you shift from execution to creation, you stop being replaceable and start being remarkable. Creation is where leadership is born. It's not just about doing what works, it's about designing what's worth doing. When you think like a creator, you become the source instead of the resource. You become the person people look to for direction, ideas, and innovation. So stop waiting to be told what to do. Start thinking about what needs to exist because you showed up. That's how you move from worker to leader, from executor to creator, from ordinary to unforgettable. A worker measures success by hours. A leader measures it by impact. The worker says, I've worked 8 hours today. The leader says, did what? I do today move the vision forward. That's the difference between trading time and creating value. Time is a limited resource, but value is a renewable force. When you think like a worker, you sell your time to survive. When you think like a leader, you multiply your value to thrive. Workers are taught to clock in and clock out, to give effort in exchange for a wage. But leaders understand that time doesn't equal transformation. Value does. You can work all day and still end the day empty if you didn't add value to something greater than yourself. That's why leaders focus on becoming more valuable, not just more available. Because the marketplace doesn't pay for time. It pays for value. The more valuable you become, the more your time is worth. A worker says, I'm paid by the hour. A leader says, I'm paid for the difference I make. The worker focuses on what they're earning. The leader focuses on what they're becoming. Because the person you're becoming determines the kind of value you can create. If you want to increase your income, increase your impact, if you want to elevate your position, elevate your perspective, the leader knows that money follows mastery. So instead of chasing hours, they chase excellence. Leaders don't ask, how much will I get paid for this? They ask, how much value will this produce for others? They understand that you can't rise above the level of value you provide. The more value you create, the more influence you attract. Workers show up for compensation, leaders show up for contribution, and when your focus shifts from getting paid to adding value, your reward eventually multiplies beyond what any paycheck could offer. You can't build wealth by selling time. You build wealth by serving purpose. Time is something you spend. Value is something you create. Time runs out, but value compounds. Every time you grow, learn, or serve, you're increasing your value. Leaders are obsessed with becoming more valuable, not just more visible. They read, study, listen, and apply because they know that who they're becoming determines what they can contribute. Workers wait for opportunity. Leaders prepare for it, and preparation increases value. You don't get promoted because of time. You get promoted because of transformation. You don't get noticed because of hours. You get noticed because of results. A leader doesn't measure progress by the clock. They measure it by the change they create. That's why leaders think in terms of multiplication, not maintenance. When you start to think like a leader, you stop asking, how long will it take? And start asking, how far can this go? You stop working for minutes and start building for meaning. You start valuing growth over grind, purpose over pay, and legacy over labor. That's when your time starts working for you instead of against you. So stop counting hours and start creating value. Stop measuring your worth by how long you work and start measuring it by how much you've grown, how many lives you've touched, and how much excellence you've added to everything you do. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't remember how long you worked. It remembers the value you brought. Leaders don't get paid for time. They get paid for transformation. Most people never rise to their potential because they choose comfort over growth. They want success, but they don't want the stretching that comes with it. They want the reward, but not the resistance. But every true leader understands that growth and comfort cannot live in the same space. One has to die for the other to live. Growth demands discomfort. It demands sacrifice, stretching in seasons where you feel uncertain, but that's the cost of greatness. A worker's mindset looks for stability. I just want to feel secure, they say, but a leader's mindset looks for expansion. I want to become more, they declare. Workers want to stay where it's safe. Leaders step where it's scary because they know that safety might protect your present, but it will also limit your future. The comfort zone is beautiful, but nothing grows there. Every time you feel discomfort, it's a sign that you're stepping into new territory. Growth doesn't happen when you know everything. It happens when you stretch beyond what you know. Leaders are willing to be uncomfortable today to become unstoppable tomorrow. They understand that the pain of growth is temporary, but the pain of regret lasts forever. So they choose growth. They choose to be stretched, challenged, corrected, and refined. When you think like a worker, you look for rest. When you think like a leader, you look for results. That doesn't mean leaders don't rest. It means they don't let comfort control them. The worker says, I've done enough. The leader says, I can do better. The worker looks for ease. The leader looks for evolution. Leaders don't fear discomfort. They respect it because they know it's the furnace that forges their greatness. Every challenge is an invitation to grow. Every pressure is proof that potential is being pulled out of you. When life gets hard, the worker says, why is this happening to me? The leader says, what is this teaching me? The worker looks for a way out. The leader looks for a way up. That's the difference. One avoids, the other advances. And that's why leaders keep rising while others remain stuck. Growth requires humility. You have to be willing to admit that you don't know everything, that there's room to improve, that your next level will demand a different version of you. That kind of honesty is uncomfortable, but it's necessary because you can't transform while you're trying to stay the same. Comfort keeps you in circles. Growth takes you forward. So if you want to lead, you have to make peace with pressure. You have to stop chasing what's easy and start embracing what's necessary. Growth isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's waking up early when you don't feel like it. It's studying when others sleep. It's believing when nothing around you looks like progress. But that's what separates leaders from followers. When you choose growth over comfort, you stop living for convenience and start living for calling. You stop settling for what's available and start reaching for what's possible. And every time you stretch yourself, you expand your capacity for more wisdom, more impact, more influence, more abundance. That's how you rise. The worker seeks peace of mind. The leader seeks power of purpose. The worker hides from the unknown. The leader walks into it with faith, because leaders understand that the path to greatness is paved with discomfort. So don't run from the stretching. Don't escape the process. Lean into it, because every time you choose growth over comfort, you're not just changing your situation, you're changing who you are, and that change is what builds leaders. A worker shows up for the paycheck. A leader shows up for the purpose. The worker asks, what am I getting out of this? The leader asks, what am I leaving behind because of this? That's the difference between living for income and living for impact. When you think like a worker, your focus ends on Friday. When you think like a leader, your vision extends beyond your lifetime, because leaders understand that money will fade, but legacy will echo. A paycheck might feed you for a week, but purpose feeds generations. That's why leaders don't just work for money, they work for meaning. They understand that every day is a chance to plant something that will outlast them. A worker is satisfied when they're paid. A leader is fulfilled when they've made a difference. The worker chases compensation. The leader creates contribution. When you think like a worker, you're focused on surviving the month. When you think like a leader, you're focused on shaping the decade. Leaders understand that success isn't about how much you collect. It's about how much you contribute. They know that real wealth is measured by the lives you impact, the values you instill, and the example you leave behind, because your legacy is not what you leave to people. It's what you leave in them. Leaders think generationally. They ask, what can I build today that will still bless others when I'm gone? They don't waste time chasing temporary rewards. They invest time creating permanent change. While a worker is counting paychecks, a leader is counting lives changed. That's why leaders don't get distracted by short-term comfort. They're driven by long-term calling. Your legacy is being written right now in the way you think, work, speak, and serve. Every decision is a line in that story. Every sacrifice is a sentence. Every act of leadership is a chapter. You may not see it yet, but someone's future is being shaped by your faithfulness today. That's the power of legacy. It multiplies beyond your sight. Leaders understand the purpose outlasts payment. You can't take your paycheck with you when you're gone, but your legacy can live forever. The worker asks, how much am I earning? The leader asks, how much am I elevating others? The worker says, I want to get paid more. The leader says, I want to create more value for others. And in the end, the leader often earns far more, because legacy attracts reward. When you live for legacy, you stop competing and start contributing. You stop chasing approval and start creating impact. You're not just trying to make a living, you're trying to make a difference. And the truth is, when your purpose is big enough, the paycheck will follow. But when the paycheck is your only purpose, fulfillment will never arrive. So don't spend your life chasing wages, spend it creating worth. Don't live to collect, live to contribute. Don't just make money, make meaning, because one day your job title will be forgotten, but your impact won't. The words you spoke, the lives you touched, the example you set, that's what will echo long after you're gone. Legacy over paycheck. That's the mindset that turns labor into leadership and work into worship. because the leader's true reward isn't in what they receive. It's in what they release. And when you think like that, your influence doesn't end when you clock out. It continues every time someone is inspired by the life you lived. The difference between a worker and a leader is not in position, it's in perception. The moment you decide to think differently, your entire life begins to elevate. Thinking like a leader means you no longer see yourself as a part of the system. You see yourself as the architect of it. You no longer wait for opportunities. You create them. You no longer chase rewards. You attract them through vision, responsibility, creation, value, growth, and legacy. A worker's mindset keeps you surviving, but a leader's mindset makes you thrive. Workers wait for the next instruction. Leaders write the next direction. Workers focus on what's required. Leaders focus on what's possible. The moment you stop thinking about how to earn more time and start thinking about how to produce more value, you step into leadership. The moment you stop running from discomfort and start growing through it, you step into greatness. The moment you stop working for a paycheck and start working for a purpose, you begin to build a legacy. You were not created to live small, to simply exist, or to just get by. You were created to lead, to build, to multiply, and to impact. You were created to think beyond what is and envision what could be. So don't let your title limit you, and don't let your circumstances define you. You can be a leader right where you are. You can lead in your mindset, your actions, your discipline, and your faith. Every leader begins as a worker, but not every worker becomes a leader. The difference lies in who decides to think higher. So today, make that decision. Don't just work for the world, shape it. Don't just perform, produce change. Don't just complete, create. Because when you start to think like a leader and not a worker, your purpose expands, your influence multiplies, and your life begins to reflect the greatness that's always been inside you.